The scent of cinnamon wafting through ancient bazaars, the burn of black pepper on medieval tongues, the golden glow of turmeric in Indian kitchens. These aren't just ingredients in your spice rack, they're the driving forces behind some of history's most dramatic events. Welcome to Threads of History, and today we're uncovering the incredible story of how tiny seeds, bark, and roots shaped empires, sparked wars, and connected civilizations across the globe. Imagine a world where a handful of peppercorns could buy you a sheep, where nutmeg was literally worth its weight in gold, and where the search for cinnamon led to the discovery of entire continents. This isn't fantasy, this is the extraordinary true history of spices, and it's far more thrilling than any adventure novel. Our journey begins in the dawn of civilization itself, where the first humans discovered that certain plants could do more than just fill their stomachs. They could preserve food, heal wounds, and transform the mundane into the magical. But what started as local discoveries would eventually become the catalyst for global transformation. The story of spices is fundamentally the story of humanity's restless desire for flavor, preservation, and profit. It's a tale that spans millennia and continents, involving everyone from Egyptian pharaohs to Portuguese explorers, from Venetian merchants to Dutch colonists. These aromatic treasures didn't just season food, they seasoned history itself. Let's start our exploration in ancient Egypt, where the relationship between spices and power first became apparent. The pyramids weren't just monuments to pharaohs, they were spice vaults for the afterlife. Cinnamon, cassia, and other precious aromatics were carefully wrapped with mummies, ensuring the deceased would be properly seasoned for eternity. The Ebers papyrus, dating back to 1550 BCE, lists over 700 medicinal remedies, many involving spices that had to be imported from distant lands. But Egypt wasn't just consuming spices, it was controlling their trade. The Red Sea became a highway for aromatic wealth, with Egyptian merchants acting as middlemen between the spice-producing regions of the East and the hungry markets of the Mediterranean. This control over the spice trade was so lucrative that it helped fund the construction of temples and pyramids that still stand today. Meanwhile, in ancient Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets reveal sophisticated spice trading networks. The Sumerians were importing cinnamon from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, over 4,000 years ago. Think about that for a moment. People were risking their lives on dangerous sea voyages, crossing thousands of miles of ocean just to bring back tree bark. This wasn't just trade, it was an obsession. The Bible itself is peppered with references to spices, from the Queen of Sheba's gifts of spices to King Solomon, to the wise men bringing frankincense and myrrh to the infant Jesus. These weren't just religious symbols, they were indicators of incredible wealth and power. A single camel caravan loaded with spices could represent the economic output of an entire city. But perhaps nowhere was the connection between spices and power more evident than in ancient Rome. The Romans consumed spices with an enthusiasm that bordered on the ridiculous. They put garum, a fermented fish sauce, on everything, seasoned their wine with spices, and even used pepper as currency. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, giving us the phrase, "worth your salt." The Roman appetite for spices was so enormous that it created a massive trade deficit with the East. Roman gold flowed out of the empire and into the hands of Indian and Arabian spice merchants. The historian Pliny the Elder complained that Roman women's love of pearls, silk, and spices was draining the empire of 55 million sestertii annually, roughly equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars today. This Roman demand created the first truly global trade networks. Spices from the Malabar coast of India, the Spice Islands of Indonesia, and the highlands of Ceylon found their way to Roman dinner tables through a complex network of merchants, sea captains, and caravan leaders. The famous Silk Road wasn't just about silk. It was a spice highway that connected east and west. But here's where the story gets really interesting. As the Roman Empire declined, control of the spice trade shifted to new players. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, became the new gateway between East and West. Constantinople's position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia made it the perfect choke point for the spice trade. The Byzantines understood the power of spices perhaps better than anyone before them. They didn't just trade spices, they weaponized them. By controlling access to Eastern spices, they could influence the policies of Western European kingdoms. Want cinnamon for your royal feast? Better stay on good terms with Constantinople. Need pepper for preserving meat through winter? Time to negotiate with the Byzantine emperor. This Byzantine monopoly on spices had profound consequences for medieval Europe. Spices became symbols of wealth and status. A medieval European lord might display his power not through gold or jewels, but through the spices on his table. The more exotic the spice, the more powerful the message. Nutmeg, cloves, and cardamom became the ultimate status symbols. Medieval European cuisine was revolutionized by spices. Contrary to popular belief, people in the Middle Ages didn't use spices just to mask the taste of rotten meat. They used them because they were expensive and delicious. A single medieval feast might feature dozens of spices, a small fortune. Recipe books from this period read like treasure inventories, with precise measurements of precious spices. The medieval spice trade also gave birth to some of Europe's most powerful merchant families. The Medici family of Florence built their banking empire partly on spice trading profits. Venice became one of the wealthiest cities in the world by controlling the spice trade routes through the eastern Mediterranean. Venetian merchants were so successful that they became the envy of all Europe. But this comfortable arrangement couldn't last forever. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century threatened to cut off European access to Eastern spices entirely. The Ottomans, controlling the traditional overland routes to Asia, could charge whatever they wanted for passage. European merchants faced a choice: pay the Ottoman tolls or find another way to the spice-producing regions of the East. This is where our story takes a dramatic turn. The European search for alternative routes to the Spice Islands would literally reshape the world map. Portuguese explorers, backed by Prince Henry the Navigator, began pushing down the African coast, hoping to find a sea route to India. Spanish monarchs, not to be outdone, sponsored expeditions to find a western route to the spices of the East. The Portuguese were the first to succeed. Vasco da Gama's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope in 1498 opened a direct sea route from Europe to the spice-producing regions of India and Southeast Asia. For the first time in history, Europeans could bypass the traditional middlemen and go directly to the source of spices. The profits were staggering. A single successful voyage to the Spice Islands could return profits of 1,000% or more. Pepper, which sold for 3 pence per pound in India, could fetch 3 shillings per pound in Europe, a 20-fold markup. Nutmeg and cloves offered even higher returns. Ships that left Europe with holds full of silver and gold returned with cargo worth exponentially more. But the Portuguese success was short-lived. Other European powers quickly recognized the potential profits and began challenging Portuguese dominance. The Dutch, with their superior naval technology and ruthless business practices, gradually pushed the Portuguese out of the most profitable spice-producing regions. The Dutch East India Company became the world's first multinational corporation, and it was built on spices. The company's approach was revolutionary. Instead of just trading for spices, they would control their production. Dutch forces seized control of key spice-producing islands, established plantations, and created a monopoly that would last for centuries. This Dutch monopoly had devastating consequences for the indigenous peoples of the Spice Islands. Entire populations were enslaved or killed to maintain Dutch control over spice production. The island of Banda, once home to 15,000 people, was reduced to just 1,000 inhabitants after Dutch conquest. The Dutch imported slaves from other parts of Indonesia to work the spice plantations under brutal conditions. But the Dutch weren't the only European power pursuing spice wealth. The British, French and Spanish all established their own trading companies and colonies, often coming into direct conflict with Dutch interests. The spice trade became a zero-sum game, where European powers fought proxy wars across the globe. The British, initially unable to compete with Dutch control of the Spice Islands, turned their attention to India. The British East India Company began as a spice trading venture but gradually evolved into a territorial power. The company's control over Indian spice production, particularly black pepper from the Malabar coast, gave them enormous leverage in global markets. The transformation of the British East India Company from a trading company to a colonial power illustrates the political consequences of the spice trade. What began as commercial competition evolved into territorial conquest. The company raised its own armies, appointed its own governors, and essentially functioned as a state within a state. The French, not to be outdone, established their own trading posts and colonies in India and Southeast Asia. The French East India Company competed directly with British and Dutch interests, leading to a series of conflicts that would rage for decades. The 7 Years' War, fought partly over control of spice-producing territories, has been called the first true world war. Spanish colonization of the Philippines was also motivated by spice wealth. The Spanish hoped to establish a western route to the Spice Islands and break the Dutch monopoly. While they never achieved complete success, Spanish control of the Philippines did provide access to some spice production and served as a base for further expansion into Southeast Asia. The impact of European spice colonization on indigenous peoples cannot be overstated. Traditional trading relationships that had existed for centuries were destroyed overnight. Local rulers who had grown wealthy from spice trading found themselves reduced to vassals of European trading companies. Entire ecosystems were transformed as Europeans introduced plantation agriculture and slave labor. But the story of spices isn't just about European colonization. It's also about the incredible resilience and adaptability of the people who originally cultivated these precious plants. Despite centuries of foreign domination, many traditional spice-growing communities preserved their knowledge and techniques. When colonial powers eventually retreated, these communities were ready to reclaim their heritage. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the gradual decline of spice-based empires. Several factors contributed to this decline. First, the successful smuggling of spice plants broke long-held monopolies. The French managed to steal clove plants from Dutch-controlled islands and establish plantations on their own territories. The British transplanted nutmeg trees to their Caribbean colonies. Suddenly, spices that had been controlled by single European powers were being produced across multiple continents. Second, changing tastes and improved preservation techniques reduced European dependence on spices. The development of refrigeration and canning meant that spices were no longer essential for food preservation. Sugar, coffee and tea became the new luxury commodities, replacing spices as the primary drivers of global trade. Third, the rise of nationalism and independence movements in spice-producing regions challenged European control. The Dutch found it increasingly difficult to maintain their monopolies in the face of local resistance. The costs of maintaining colonial control began to outweigh the profits from spice trading. The American Revolution also had an indirect impact on the spice trade. The Boston Tea Party, while focused on tea, was part of a broader resistance to European control over global trade. American independence demonstrated that European colonial powers weren't invincible, inspiring independence movements in other parts of the world. The 19th century saw the beginning of the end for spice-based empires. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 revolutionized global trade by providing a shorter route between Europe and Asia. Steamships replaced sailing vessels, making transportation faster and more reliable. These technological advances reduced the risks and costs of spice trading, making it less profitable for European powers to maintain expensive colonial administrations. World War I and World War II further accelerated the decline of European spice empires. The wars disrupted global trade networks and drained European resources. After World War II, the process of decolonization began in earnest. Indonesia gained independence from the Dutch in 1945, ending centuries of Dutch control over the Spice Islands. India gained independence from Britain in 1947, breaking British control over the subcontinent's spice production. But the end of colonial spice empires didn't mean the end of the spice trade. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era in which spice-producing countries could control their own destinies. Countries like India, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka became major exporters of spices on their own terms, keeping the profits that had once flowed to European coffers. The modern spice trade is a multi-billion-dollar industry that continues to shape global economics and politics. India is now the world's largest producer and exporter of spices, controlling about 40% of global spice production. The Indian spice industry employs millions of people and generates billions of dollars in revenue annually. Vietnam has become a major producer of black pepper, accounting for about 40% of global production. Indonesia remains a significant producer of nutmeg and cloves. Madagascar dominates vanilla production, while Turkey leads in bay leaf and oregano production. These countries have reclaimed their positions as major players in the global spice trade. The technology revolution has also transformed the spice trade. Modern processing techniques, quality control systems, and global logistics networks have made it possible to deliver high-quality spices to consumers anywhere in the world. The Internet has created new opportunities for small-scale spice producers to reach global markets directly, bypassing traditional intermediaries. But the modern spice trade also faces new challenges. Climate change threatens traditional spice-growing regions, with changing rainfall patterns and rising temperatures affecting crop yields. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global supply chains, causing shortages and price volatility in spice markets. Political instability in some spice-producing regions continues to affect global supplies. Despite these challenges, the global demand for spices continues to grow. The rise of international cuisine, health consciousness and gourmet cooking has created new markets for both traditional and exotic spices. Turmeric, once primarily used in Indian cuisine, has become a popular health supplement worldwide. Sumac, za'atar, and other Middle Eastern spices are gaining popularity in Western kitchens. The story of spices also continues to influence modern geopolitics. The European Union's trade relationships with former colonies are still shaped by historical spice trade connections. The Indian Ocean remains a crucial region for global trade, with many of the same sea routes that carried ancient spice caravans now carrying modern cargo ships. Perhaps most importantly, the history of spices reminds us that globalization isn't a modern phenomenon. The ancient spice trade created the first truly global economy, connecting civilizations across continents and oceans. The same human desires that drove ancient merchants to risk everything for a cargo of pepper, the pursuit of profit, the love of flavor, the desire for status, continue to drive global trade today. The legacy of the spice trade can be seen in modern cuisine, where ingredients from around the world are combined in ways that would have seemed impossible to ancient cooks. A single modern meal might include black pepper from Vietnam, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cumin from India, and paprika from Spain, a testament to the global connections first established by ancient spice merchants. As we conclude this incredible journey through the history of spices, it's worth reflecting on how these tiny seeds and dried leaves changed the course of human civilization. They motivated exploration, funded empires, sparked wars, and connected cultures. They transformed cuisine, medicine, and commerce. They drove technological innovation and social change. The next time you reach for that bottle of cinnamon or sprinkle some black pepper on your food, remember that you're participating in a tradition that spans thousands of years and connects you to countless generations of traders, explorers, farmers, and cooks. These aren't just seasonings, they're the remnants of empires, the residue of adventures, and the essence of human ambition. The story of spices is ultimately a story about human nature itself, our endless quest for new experiences, our willingness to take risks for potential rewards, and our ability to transform simple, natural products into symbols of wealth, power, and cultural identity. From ancient Egyptian tombs to modern gourmet kitchens, spices continue to add flavor not just to our food, but to life itself. This has been History Found, and we hope you've enjoyed this aromatic journey through time. The next time you smell cinnamon, taste pepper, or see turmeric, you'll know the incredible story behind these everyday miracles.